Booster 19 testing at Pad 2 is in full swing, with multiple fuel loads observed this week, amongst other milestones as well with pad infrastructure. Which begs the question, how close are we to a static fire? All while the next booster in line, Booster 20, is coming along rapidly in MegaBay 1 ahead of Flight 13. And the GigaBay here on the Space Coast is taking on its final shape as well, with cladding being installed on all four sides. From Florida Space Coast to South Texas, we have all of this coming up and more on this week's Starship Update. As we discussed in last week's Starship Update, Booster 19 was lifted onto the Orbital Launch Mount at Pad 2 on Sunday in preparation for the testing closure on Tuesday. With the booster now out in the open, we can finally take a closer look at the brand new grid fins. The booster now only wears 3 grid fins instead of 4 in an offset configuration. This lone fin appears to also be angled outwards a bit, improving performance in higher angles of attack during descent, which version 3 boosters will be performing compared to previous flights with version 2. The pair of outer fins now also sport integrated lifting points as well, also to be used for catches as opposed to separate catch points also used on version 2 boosters. On the integrated hot staging ring, the clamps used to attach the ship have also been installed. While the ship is nowhere near ready for stacking atop Booster 19 yet, it still has to complete engine testing, mind you. It's nice to see progress towards flight with actual flight hardware on the pad here. Looking at the chines, we can also see that SpaceX has installed the Starlink antennas on top. Now we just need them to behave themselves during testing and hopefully they're left alone. That's called foreshadowing, kids. Booster 19, as it is now, has only 10 Raptor 3 engines installed compared to the 33 it will need for flight, and are currently spread across all 3 ring sections where they will eventually be lined up. 3 in the center, 10 in the middle ring, and 20 on the outer ring. Some metal box and cage structures have also been installed on the aft end where some engines are missing. This might be to properly plug the ports where engines otherwise would be, but it's also possible that these played a part in engine thrust simulation in earlier testing. But that's just speculation though. We can also now see where the Raptor 3 engines require shielding, mostly over the various bolted flanges and TVC actuators. But remember, the whole point of Raptor 3's design in tandem with the version 3 booster's aft end was that shielding wasn't required to the extent that we have become used to, if at all, honestly. Due to the engine's simplistic exterior design and the power heads and engine bells themselves serving as thermal protection, more shielding wasn't deemed necessary. We were also able to take a deeper look at the aft end's thermal protection system as well due to the lack of engines. It's pretty neat to see all this detail finally here in broad daylight. On Monday, the chopsticks were set free and Booster 19 was standing alone on the launch mount. When the sticks were free and clear, the grid fins moved through their entire range of motion at the pad for the very first time. I don't know why, but these sort of motion tests just sort of like tickle all the right parts of the brain. At least to me. The chopsticks were then raised above the SQD arm and wide open in a launch-like configuration, as we have seen on previous occasions. Booster 19 then came to life with the methane tank opening its valves at the top and began to vent. While the booster is pretty strong with solid structural integrity on its own, a significant factor in maintaining that is internal tank pressure. Just like how an unopened soda can is a lot stronger compared to when you first crack it open. The higher pressure inside the can pushes against the walls, fighting any forces that may want to crush it. The same logic applies here. While transporting a booster seems kind of mundane in terms of vehicle wear and tear and load forces, especially in comparison to those in flight, there is certainly a lot that could go wrong during transport if SpaceX isn't careful. Between the varying road surface heights of Highway 4, winds, and naturally being incredibly tall and not very wide, relatively, pressuring the tanks allows the booster to better hold its shape and reduce the risk of damage. With 19 settled on the launch mount, both BQDs, or booster quick disconnects, for methane and oxygen supply were hooked up to their respective locations. This design comes as one of the many upgrades on Pad 2's launch mount than that of Pad 1's singular QD design, in tandem with its relocation to the other side of the launch mount itself. Both tanks can be held at pressure as well using the BQDs. The last thing SpaceX had left to do was clean up the site. SpaceX crews were spotted on the top deck of the launch mount removing any FOD, or foreign object debris, that may have been around. FOD can be very bad news for both ground and vehicle systems alike in a variety of scenarios, especially when it comes to lighting the engines for the first time here. With all preparation done, it was time for testing here to finally commence. With the road closure in place, the new tank farm came alive as both LOX and methane sides began to chill down, as was dramatically visible with the incredible vapor being vented away. On the booster side, both LOX and methane tanks began to vent for their own thermal conditioning processes, something different being practiced here on version 3 vehicles. A frost line later appeared on the bottom of the LOX tank, openly displaying the level of propellant inside with condensation freezing on the exterior tank surface. The vehicle began to vent more thoroughly as well, as more fuel flowed into the vehicle to maintain necessary interior pressures for operation. And the frost line kept rising and rising and rising at an alarming rate, the likes of which we have never seen before, and had us almost speechless for a period of time. Some rough estimations put the flow rate here somewhere around 200 to 300 gallons per second. It's absolutely bonkers. When the LOX tank was a little over halfway full, a frost line on the methane tank then suddenly appeared as well. However, despite the frost line being outclassed in size by the LOX tank, do not be fooled into thinking that there's hardly any methane there. It's one of version 3 boosters' little secrets or party tricks. Located inside the LOX tank is the methane transfer tube to help feed the booster's Raptor 3 engines, methane. Its size being comparable to a Falcon 9 rocket. It has a freaking transfer tube. That transfer tube alone carries in the realm of about 120 metric tons of methane by itself. For reference, the booster itself contains around 800 metric tons of methane in total. So in other words, about 15% of the total methane load for the booster. And while the LOX tank has its own separate tank for the landing burn, the liquid methane transfer tube has a section near the bottom holding a conical structure with holes in it that can then be used to trap methane for the boost back and landing burn phases of flight. All of this to say that there is a good chunk of methane already on board the booster when a frost line appears on the methane tank wall on the top of the booster. For this test, Booster 19's LOX tank was at nearly 100% capacity, and the methane tank was filled to around the first 2 rings of its structure. And then suddenly, and actually catching us off guard, the detonation suppression system, or DSS, was activated, followed by the flame trench's deluge system as well, seeming to simulate a static fire without actually firing the engines. This was, altogether, the very first test of a fueled vehicle at Pad 2 and its supporting ground systems. And while we assumed that they were not going to be static firing a vehicle given the timing and nature of the test, they filled the vehicle way more than perhaps we expected, let alone the activation of the DSS and deluge systems on top of that. You could probably hear in our voices how surprised we were. Genuinely surprised. This is all building up to the eventual static fire tests. SpaceX wants to learn exactly how this new booster design behaves with this brand new launch pad system, so their path to get there is going to be gradual overall. But that was a pretty big first step. Following our shock of the events, SpaceX then began detanking the booster, concluding this monumental first test. Once complete, a mystery pipe that goes over the top deck on the side of the OLM began to vent. It's not currently known what the purpose of it is, but over time, I'm pretty sure we'll figure it out. The following day brought round 2 of testing. During the evening, the booster was loaded with about the same amount of propellant as the day prior. The previous day's test served as a good reference point for prop load operations going forward in terms of timeline milestones in the countdown, tank farm activity, etc., and that will be of immense help in monitoring tests going forward, and also launches, of course. SpaceX did make it a bit more difficult for us though by starting cryo load during sunset in some tricky light. Cinematic for sure. I mean, this shot looks straight out of Blade Runner 2049, but it made spotting details in the frost line a little bit more tricky, at least at first. Fast forward to tanking completion, indicated by 2 vents on the launch mount service structure, our eyes were focused on the flame trench itself for whatever was going to happen next. First came DSS activation, which inerts any built-up flammable gases under the launch mount and prevents any, detonations. But because it was dark out and the underside of the mount was lit super bright, it was difficult to see anything beyond some fuzz on screen, which is why daytime tests are always better to watch. The deluge system though was clearly not activated, and there was a lack of obvious ignition from the Raptors. I mean, we'd know if they were lit or not. But white clouds appeared from the flame trench, suggesting a spin prime test may have occurred. We don't know if all 10 engines were used here because we couldn't see with clarity into the trench, but the amount of vapor seemed significant. That certainly was a fairly eventful couple of days for Booster 19, and we were so glad to see it. But things got interesting later in the week. More on that in a bit. Now, if we zoom out for a second, the launch site is far from what it used to be in years prior. While progress here is always exciting and necessary for Starship, getting back into this Tank watching mode, again, is kind of nostalgic. It's like back in the good old days. But tank watching nonetheless carries on, and you can also reminisce with our classic Texas tank watching collection available at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. But how does the tank farm transfer both propellants from the storage tanks and into the vehicles? After tanker trucks deliver the three main commodities, being methane, oxygen, and nitrogen, these will then be stored inside of their respective tanks in liquid form. Other areas of the tank farm consist of massive pumps to move fluids around, subcoolers to cool the propellants down to their desired temperatures, vaporizers, and some smaller vertical tanks for additional storage. Similar to how Booster 19 needs to regulate its tank pressures, the tank farm does as well. There are 5 vertical tanks here, 3 of which are being used to backfill the storage tanks, 1 for each commodity. Fluids from each flow through the vaporizers, turning them from liquids and into a gas using the outside air as a source of heat, because the atmosphere, remember, is very, very hot by comparison. The produced gases from the vaporizers will then be routed back into the storage tanks, keeping them at their desired pressures, preventing any sort of vacuum effect from the emptying propellants. Thermally conditioning the tank farm is very important and needs to be done for every component of the tank farm that will come in contact with any cryogenics. Think pipes, pumps, subcoolers, etc. If not done correctly, fluids can quickly evaporate into a gas when it touches a relatively hot surface, expanding and possibly damaging components significantly. Once thermally conditioned, the pumps take over the job of transporting propellants from the tank farm area and out to the pad. There are 2 sets of pumps here, one being assigned for LOX and the other for methane. These are then further divided for ship and booster purposes, respectively. It's a similar story here with the subcoolers themselves, otherwise they wouldn't be needed. Inside the subcoolers are several lines for either propellant to flow through, of which are already submerged in liquid nitrogen, which is used to pull away temperature from the propellants even further. As the nitrogen warms up inside the subcoolers, it turns into a gas that proceeds to exit the system with some plumbing up top. This creates a very visible cloud of vapor that serves as a visual indicator of tank farm activity relative to loading operations. Once subcooled, the propellants travel via an underground commodities trench and out to the pad, and then either up the tower for ship or to the launch mount for the booster. During tanking, some propellant will become too warm for use and needs to be removed from the equation entirely. For LOX, it can be as easy as venting it straight into the atmosphere, which is always dramatic looking. But that's not such a good idea for methane, as it is an incredibly flammable greenhouse gas. To combat that, it's routed back into the tank farm where it's condensed back into its liquid form and is stored for future use. Think back many years ago when the Starship program was still in its infancy. SpaceX used to use a flare stack instead and would burn off the unused methane. But something happened there, which I'm sure many of you remember by now.
Whoa! Whoa!
RIP SN4. Since then, SpaceX has fully stepped away from using flare stacks at the launch site entirely. SpaceX does actually use a flare stack at the Massies test site, but that's an entirely enclosed system, preventing any sort of massive flames. It's also a completely separate test site with tons more real estate to work with here. Anyway, back to GSE. The remaining vertical tanks are used to recondense the gaseous methane back into its liquid form for storage. Once propellant load is complete on the vehicle, all supporting plumbing around the launch tower are drained completely and routed away to reduce the risks of any further and unwanted combustion around the site. That's a big boom that you do not want to have happen. This is usually announced by an audible call out in the countdown. Now back to Booster 19. Following its second day of testing, we were hoping that the next road and beach closure would finally showcase the first ever static fire of a Block 3 booster at Pad 2. But before that could happen, the road closure was suddenly revoked. This was then followed by the booster transport stand rolling back over to the lift station next to the launch mount. To us, this kind of seemed like bad news. The chopsticks were then lowered back around Booster 19, signaling that the booster would indeed be lifted off of the launch mount. And while all of this was going on, a boom lift was inspecting a Starlink antenna on top of one of the booster's shines. Remember that foreshadowing from earlier? With the road closure being revoked and seeing all of this, could it be that something broke during testing and the booster is being rolled back? Although the booster was later removed from the launch mount and placed on the booster transport stand, no actual transport closures were posted from the launch site. While curious, this seemed like whatever issues that they were working on weren't deal breakers, which is promising. After Booster 19 was placed onto the booster transport stand, a crew was once again seen working on the Starlink antenna. At the same time, SpaceX workers were also spotted working on the engine section of Booster 19. We don't know if they were just inspecting the engine section or actually performing repairs. During this ongoing work, new road closures appeared on Starbase's website. giving us a good idea of when SpaceX planned to finish the required work and have the booster once again ready for testing. With work on Booster 19 completed, it was then lifted off of the booster transport stand once more and placed back onto the launch mount, hopefully clearing the way for further testing for the next road closure. And it looks like the work on Booster 19 went according to plan as testing resumed at Pad 2. This third day of testing at the launch site saw the vehicle getting frosty once again, verifying that it's ready for the next step in the campaign, a static fire. Another day of testing followed, and this is the day that we have been waiting for: engines running on the Orbital Launch Mount. We've seen so many tests of the ground support equipment, the water deluge system, and of course the booster itself. And now it was time to put it all together and see what Super Heavy version 3 is made of. Now, of course, this was not a 33 engine static fire test. Booster 19 only has 10 Raptor 3 engines installed, and thanks to this beefed up launch mount, it's difficult to see exactly which engines were running. Fingers crossed that SpaceX releases some more information letting us know how this test went. Now, while the tank farm still needs tanker trucks for its nitrogen, oxygen, and methane supply, construction on the air separation unit across the road continues. This week has seen more bracing installed between the various modules. This is likely to give the ASU more structural rigidity during a launch and landing, as the launch site is directly across the road from the ASU itself. You absolutely don't want anything to tip over during launch or landing here. The amount of acoustic energy coming from Starship already is absurd as is, let alone this close. The ASU is also key to rapid launch cadences in the future for both oxygen and methane supplies, so it's best not to damage it. While Booster 19 has been pushing through testing at Pad 2, SpaceX has been working away on the next one in line, Booster 20, inside of GigaBay 1. Earlier in the week, Booster 20's methane landing tank and lower section of the transfer tube roll out of Star Factory and into GigaBay 1 to join the rest of Booster 20 for stacking. The transfer tube connects the methane tank at the top of the booster to the engine section at the bottom. Otherwise, the LOX tank is directly in the way, and the engines cannot be supplied with methane, which is, well, suboptimal for obvious reasons. Later in the week, the rest of Booster 20's transfer tube rolled out, and on the night of the 13th, it was lifted for installation onto Booster 20. The final F section, aka the A6 section, for Booster 20 was also rolled out last week, meaning that SpaceX only has to roll out and stack 4 more barrel sections and the LOX landing tank to complete booster stacking: the engine section, the forward dome section of Booster 20, the F3 section, and the F2 section. This week was an acceleration in Booster 20 stacking, with transfer tube installation happening faster than that of B18, 36 days for Booster 20 compared to 54. This is slower than B19 by 25 days though, which was, of course, accelerated due to the unfortunate mishap of B18 at Masseys. Starbase's GigaBay construction has been making solid progress also this week, with workers at the production site, as Level 4 continues to take shape across the majority of the structure. GigaBay is expected to be about 5 levels tall, with each level being around 20 meters in height, although the 5th level looks to be broken into 2 lots of half-height columns. GigaBay will still likely be taller than this though, as it will eventually have similar spaces to what the Megabays have on top right now. Once fully constructed, GigaBay will surpass the abilities of both the Megabays combined and will have a total of 24 work stands between ships and boosters, enabling SpaceX to enormously increase the speed at which they build both vehicles. At the Sanchez lot, the new ship thrust simulator stand is still under construction. This week, the 6 rams for all 6 engines, 3 sea level and 3 vacuum optimized on ships, have been placed onto the stand, but still need to be fully plumbed in for full use. These rams will push against the aft of the ship during a cryo test to verify if it can withstand the loads from the Raptor engines during flight. It's likely that Ship 40 will be the first to utilize this new test stand, as SpaceX mentioned that with the rollback of Ship 39, it has completed its cryogenic-proof test campaign. Time for our McGregor Minute. Starbase has been really busy with testing this week, but so was SpaceX's premier engine testing facility. All Raptor engine testing is conducted here, on top of that of Merlin, and also Falcon 9's first and second stages. And this week has very much been another for cadence testing with Raptor 3. This week saw a total of 21 tests and a combined nearly 30 minutes of burn time. This high cadence of production and testing on the engine side enables SpaceX to quickly turn around from one flight to another, as there will always be engines available for replacements on new boosters and ships. This week, a new record high Raptor was spotted, number 129. As a new stack requires 39 engines each, this means that SpaceX may be close to having 3 flights worth of flight-ready engines. Of the tests conducted, most were over 100 seconds in duration, with some of them being shorter 20-second relight tests to try and simulate that of in-space relights and landing burns. Along with Raptor 3 129, we also spotted 82, 124, 128, and one for which we couldn't really see the full number, but it was Raptor 3 something 9. Now coming back to Starbase for a minute and looking over at the Massies test site, S39.1 has finally made its way onto the old can crusher as expected after spending a long time on the ship cryo stand. No, seriously, it was hogging that stand for a very long time. This is the ship aft section test article that SpaceX is using to verify version 3 ship structural integrity. The can crusher is used in tandem with the blue tension rods to apply forces to the tank that a vehicle might experience during flight, hence the name can crusher. After it was moved here, the can crusher cap was installed on top, followed by the installation of the 20 tension rods. The first tests conducted here are hopefully going to start fairly soon, and the data gathered here is likely going to be needed for Flight 12 application. Hopefully this one doesn't experience an anomaly like B18.1 and B18.3 did both here on the super crusher. Then again, testing to failure isn't exactly unheard of with these test articles. Late on the 13th, SpaceX used a Massies to production road closure to transport an empty stand back from the test site. This looked to be the one used to transport test tanks and will likely be used to transport the new test tank currently being stacked in GigaBay 1 to Masseys at a later date. Now, if you're wondering which test tank, because there's been so many, it's this. 2 sections have been stacked together in GigaBay 1, a Block 3 booster common dome section and the salvaged B18.3 forward dome section. In the end, it might be going over to the super crusher and be used to verify the Block 3 grid fin socket design, and it may also be used for some other unknown type of testing. Keep an eye on Starbase Live and watch for yourself. Let's finish off here by bringing it home to the Space Coast. The final 2 modules for Space Launch Complex 37's first launch tower rolled by the VAB this week, being modules 2 and 4. All modules being moved to Pad 37 creates some much needed room for construction for the second set of launch tower modules at Roberts Road. Now keep in mind, Pad 37 is a very large facility and will not only have 2 Starship launch towers, but 2 catch towers as well, on top of the fact that it will have its own methane liquefier and an air separation unit, similar to what SpaceX is doing at Starbase, allowing the launch site to produce its own commodities. We aren't sure when the stacking of these modules will start, or even the current state of foundation work over there, but we suspect we aren't too far away from all that kicking off though. We of course cannot forget about historic Launch Complex 39A, which, on March 9th, received 2 vaporizers for its very own tank farm. The Orbital Launch Mount at Pad A as well is also receiving some attention in the form of new parts being installed in various locations. But the same can also be said for the chopsticks as well, and the newly installed ship QD arm. While there is still a long way to go before SpaceX can use GigaBay at Roberts Road, more cladding has been installed this week, designed to provide weather and thermal protection. Similar to that in Starbase, this building will be 5 levels tall with added rooms on top, and will have 24 workstations for SpaceX to split between Florida's future ships and boosters. It is very close to its final height here, and given the work already done so far, we can finally start to really have a sense of scale for how gargantuan this facility really is. And teams haven't even begun Star Factory 2.0 yet, so there is much more to come here at Roberts Road in the not too distant future. Well, hopefully. Next week promises to be an exciting one as Booster 19 is back on the pad, wrapping up its first phase of testing. How long before it rolls back with all of its engines installed? And how long before both GigaBays, both here in Florida and that in Starbase, are ready to be used? Let us know in the comments section down below. I'm Max Evans for NSF. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.